Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of Chin-Quee Chats, the bite-sized podcast where you talk movies, sports, and everything in between. I am your host, Matthew Chin-Quee, and with me I have a special guest who has been trying to come on the show for a while. We ran into some scheduling conflicts way back in like July or something like that, but finally it's happened. Mr. Nolan Dean, how are you doing, Nolan?
I'm doing great, man, and I've been wanting to come on the show ever since you talked about it on Movie Talk by Movie Fans, because I love the whole vibe you've got for this podcast. Just feels like two friends hanging out, talking about movies and stuff.
Yeah, for people who listen to the show a lot, you guys know I'm not organized at all, so I guess maybe that's the appeal of it, that it's not like a rigid or very professional podcast. It's just a conversation and something that you could have if we just met up in real life and started talking about stuff. Which brings me to my topic for this week is coming of age movies. And there's actually two reasons why I wanted to situate this episode on coming of age. One, that this is the 21st episode, and in the States, most states, that's when kids come of age. And two, Nolan is actually writing a book in the genre. You want to talk about that just for a little bit?
So the book I'm working on is it's called Moonflower, and if you heard about the premise or anything, it would sound like a fantasy story, but this is part of why I love coming of age so much, is that you can apply it to all different genres. So at its core, what I'm writing is a coming of age story, but it's just got fantasy elements to make it more fun for the reader. And I've got the synopsis right here, if I can read that.
Yeah, go ahead.
11-year-old Millie Robertson only read about the great adventures from beyond her bedroom window. She never thought for a second she would be living in one. On a fateful summer night, she follows a bright light in her garden that whisks her away to the strange land of Vicario Valley, where she meets an elven princess, Jade, and a handsome inventor, Zigzag. They tell her of a great evil soon predicted to destroy their kingdom, and a prophecy that hints to Millie being the savior. Rather than rise up to this terrifying challenge herself, Millie asks for her favorite fictional hero, Moonflower Jones, to be brought to life to save them. But Millie will soon learn that there is more to Moonflower than what resides within the pages of her story, and it's about to be unleashed.
That sounds really cool. That not like the beginning. I was thinking, that kind of sounds a little bit like I don't know if you've seen the movie Stardust, where he's kind of secluded in his own world, and he finds out like about this other bigger world, but then it has elements of things we've seen in other movies, such as the one that comes to mind is one that our friend Ewan Brown told me about recently, called Purple Rose of Cairo, and it's about a fictional character coming to life, and it brings all these elements together. But that sounds really cool. I hope you get that finished, because I want to read it.
Yeah, funny you mentioned that. I've actually got Stardust sitting on my bookshelf right in front of me. I haven't read it yet, but I'm going for that sort of vibe, because I thought it would be a really fun idea for a villain if they started out as someone who you think would be a hero, but then there's a lot of subtext to it where it's like this person was written through the mindset of someone who was kind of cynical, and that reflects on their personality. And Moonflower, if I could describe her in like a really quick sentence, she's kind of like the female equivalent of what a Gaston character would be. So rather than being like a Prince Charming, she's like the strong female character that's strong in all the wrong reasons. She's sort of like very skilled, but she does not care about anybody else but herself.
That sounds really interesting. Again, I hope you finish it soon so I can read it, because legitimately you have me really intrigued with this.
Yeah, I've got beta readers working on it right now, so once I do get it finished, I'd be happy to add you to the group after.
Awesome, sounds good. So we're going to take a really quick break before we go into the cinema chat, because if you couldn't tell, I am sick, and that is why my voice is so husky today. So I'm going to get a quick drink of water and be right back so we can talk about coming of age movies. And we are back for the Cinema Chat segment with Mr. Nolan Dean to talk about coming of age movies. Now, Nolan, when you think of coming of age movies, what is one of the films that really comes to your mind?
Well, really, any film that contains a character under the age of 18 going through something is a coming-of-age movie, but the one that comes to mind right away for me is Boyhood, because that is a literal coming-of-age movie in every sense, and that was my favorite movie of 2014, and a reason I love coming-of-age so much is because it gives writers this kind of format where they can easily do a journey, and the journey can just be about the character growing up and what their struggles are and the things that they face. And, you know, all of us can relate to that because we all had to grow up at some point. And with coming of age, you don't have to just do it like in high school. Like I said, you can apply it to other genres as well. Like, you could see Harry Potter as a coming of age story. You can see Percy Jackson as a coming of age story. Spider-Man Homecoming is a coming-of-age story and a superhero story, so it gives authors and writers and screenwriters and that a lot of leeway, and I find that really interesting.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Boyhood is because that's one of the coming-of-age movies, and I love the genre. It's one of them that I really haven't gravitated to. Granted, I have only seen it once, and I do have to revisit it, but when I first watched it, I was surprised about how I just couldn't connect with the character, which again is really weird because I've connected with almost all of Richard Linklater films and coming of age movies, but it might just be a personal thing because I completely understand why people love Boyhood, and I can see where people really have that sense of connection and, for lack of a better phrase, nostalgia towards the events that kind of go on in Boyhood. But that's one that never really spoke to me.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that. I mean, characters aren't always going to relate to every single audience member, but the reason that I personally related to Mason's character is because a lot of the stuff that he grows up around, it was the same stuff that I grew up around, so the reason he's kind of abstract in a way as a character is it's so you can kind of put yourself in his shoes, and for that, it works for some people, doesn't work for others, and, you know, that's fair enough, but it's still, I can't deny the sheer honesty that Boyhood goes through. Like, it does not play it safe at all. He goes through some really tough stuff, and rather than giving him, like, I suppose this is a spoiler for Boyhood, rather than giving him, like, a big, massive, happy ending, the ending is just so bittersweet that it's one of the first coming-of-age movies I've seen where it actually feels like real life, and I really appreciate it for that.
Yeah, that's something that I never thought of Boyhood that way, especially the ending. Because a lot of coming of age films, they do end kind of on a happy note, because a lot of these coming of age movies, they want you to feel a little bit more positive. And that's not to say that Boyhood is necessarily negative, but it's more real and like brutally real in certain points about the way that it tells its story. And I can for sure appreciate that.
Yeah, and I've seen other coming of age movies that kind of tackle that as well. On my show Movies and Me, I had Jonathan Youngblood on, and we were talking about Perks of Being a Wallflower. I think that's another good example of a great coming of age movie that isn't afraid to be really real about the struggles that teens go through. And part of what makes those stories work for me is that they're purely character driven, and I've always been drawn to character driven stories, whereas I know some other people, especially in the movie talk group, they clearly seem more driven towards plot stories, and, you know, that's absolutely fine. You know, we all like different stuff, but I've always thought that if you can relate to a character, it gives the writer such freedom that they could do necessarily whatever they want to, and you'd be on board because you like the character so much. I mean, that's why Supernatural has lasted for as long as it does, not because it's so complex as a plot, it's lasted strong because people like Sam and Dean as characters, so I think that applies to a lot of coming-of-age movies as well, and that's why I relate to them so much.
Well, if we're talking character and relating with character struggles, I think that and coming of age movies, I think we'd be remiss not to mention almost the quintessential one. That's Breakfast Club, the one that has, like many, you mentioned it before, like many coming of age movies, it's set in high school, but uh, having it's unique in that having five characters, these five characters, and they're all such different characters, and each of them kind of represents an archetype in high school that you can point to one of these characters and say, yes, I knew someone like that in high school, I knew someone like that growing up. And they each have their own set of struggles, and throughout the movie, those gradually get revealed, and you realize, and they learn to grow as characters with it, and grow as people with that. What are your thoughts on Breakfast Club?
So, Breakfast Club is my second favorite movie of all time behind Jaws, and that was the first time when I heard the premise for it, I was just like, okay, I've seen that thing done a million times. This was like when I was 14 and I was very angsty about what I wanted to see at the movies. But, watching Breakfast Club, it's just, John Hughes has this way with characters that, like you said, they all represent archetypes, but throughout that story, they all begin to break those archetypes as well. And I don't know if you've seen any of my video essays, but I'm actually planning a one on Breakfast Club that talks about what it does with transforming the archetypes. And the best thing about that is that you don't just relate to, say, one character. You can relate to John Bender, you can relate to Claire, and you can relate to Brian and all these other people, because at the end of the day, yeah, we all may be from different cliques, but we do go through the same things, even if we don't want to realize it. And Breakfast Club, I think the ending of it's sort of half happy, half sad. It's sort of a bittersweet thing. You feel like at that moment they all understand each other, but whether they went back to being friends or not, we'll never know. And I kind of don't want to know, because that's so honest of just like what happens when you graduate from high school.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things where leaving the end open like that definitely makes the movie better, because I don't think that if John Hughes had decided to spell it out for us, whether they decided to be friends or they just ended up breaking apart and never talking to each other again, I think that skews the movie in two different paths. Whereas if you keep it open, there's endless possibilities, and it kind of makes the movie more open interpretation, which is something that I really love about movies just in general. But actually, when I first watched Breakfast Club, and I'd only seen it, I think, 3 years ago, I had this notion that it was going to be like a happy ending, a really happy coming of age movie, like similar to Ferris Bueller, which I hope we'll get to talking to about later. But I had just finished watching Schindler's List on the train, so I was like, oh, I'll watch something happy. I'll watch Breakfast Club. And that was the most depressing doubleheader I've ever watched in my life. I was sitting there like trying not to cry on the train, with a packed train with people like looking at me. It was not a good time. Well, it was a good time with great movies, but it was hard.
Man, I can't even imagine that coming up as a double feature.
What's another coming of age movie that you love?
Right off the bat, I also did an essay about this last month. Mean Girls, and Mean Girls is another one where you see the synopsis for it and you hear stuff about it, and you're like, okay, at this time I'm a 15-year-old kid in high school. Am I going to relate to this movie at all? And I watched it, and Mean Girls is one of my favorite movies of the 2000s, because not only is it kind of honest, it does also give you that happy ending and those fun characters, and it reminds you that, yeah, whilst high school can be bad and like really hard at times, you can still have fun, and at the end of the day, teenage characters can still do the right thing. And that's something that kind of annoys me when I'm talking about film criticism with others, is that if a movie has teenage characters, I've seen people who will immediately dismiss it because they're not in high school anymore. And I just don't understand that mindset, because these stories have the power to not only remind you of what you were like in your childhood, but sort of reminisce and look at how far you've come. And Mean Girls is one of those that does it for me. It's really funny. It's really heartfelt. It's definitely Lindsay Lohan's best performance, and I can rewatch it pretty easily.
Mean Girls is probably one of the most endlessly quotable films like ever. You go into, especially people around our age, everybody knows Mean Girls. Everybody knows these quotes. And coming back to your point about people kind of dismissing teen movies or teen characters, I completely agree with you, because in a lot of these movies, and this may not be 100% true for every coming of age movie, but the high school situations that they're put in are kind of representative of a little bit of representative of what people face in the real world. And these characters, as they grow and learn to make decisions based off of these, you can reflect and see yourself within them. And I think that is one of the most powerful things about coming of age movies, because they have, they can be fun. You can put them on just to laugh and have fun, but they also, a lot of them have these messages about how to deal with, societal pressures, body image and whatnot, especially with Mean Girls.
Yeah, and the quotableness of it, that's all down to Tina Fey, because when it comes to screenwriters, she is probably the one of them that I will always look out for, because when you're reading her dialogue, it kind of feels to me like I'm reading a script. And I've read the book of Mean Girls, Queen Bees and Wannabes. It's almost completely different from the movie, but it embodies the same message, and I love it for that, when you can have two different forms of art giving you the same kind of thing but learning different things from it. That's good writing.
Yeah. Now moving on to a coming of age movie that I don't know if it necessarily has good writing, but it's really fun and one of my favorites, and that's American Pie. And this is a series that I had binge watched, maybe not sober, last year, but it was one of my favorite movie marathons to go through, because unlike a lot of these other coming of age movies, and you might beg to differ, but I don't really see as much of a underlying message under this, where it's rather just more of a comedic sex comedy where you can sit there and just laugh at it. What do you think of American Pie?
I watch American Pie the same way I would watch something like, I don't know if you've ever seen the UK version of the In-Betweeners show.
I have no idea what that is.
So it's kind of similar to American Pie in a way. It's got that lad culture kind of thing going for it, and the In-Betweeners also, like American Pie, it follows these kids in high school, like just trying to lose their virginity and stuff, and they get into a bunch of hijinks. But the thing that makes American Pie work and both the In-Betweeners work is that they are funny, but they don't forget to have heart along with it. Because if you're just being 100% funny without anything to back it up, your movie's going to end up like a really long SNL sketch. And American Pie is one of those movies that it reminds me a lot of like the fun times I had with my friend group back in high school. And it's a great group watch. It's a great I was about to say family watch there. Yeah, don't watch American Pie with your family.
Yeah, no, don't.
But the thing is, I just haven't rewatched it in so long, but I can remember American Pie being so quotable, and everybody remembered Sean William Scott after that.
Yeah. You mentioned watching it with your family. It actually popped on my TV this summer, and my parents walked in. I think it was the scene, like the American Pie scene, where he's trying to bang the apple pie, and that was one of the most awkward experiences of my entire life, trying to explain what was going on there.
Oh my god. I know exactly what you mean, buddy.
All right, how about one more from you? Let's what's your last coming of age movie that you want to talk about?
Right, well, I'm probably going to get a little bit of shade for this because it's such a recent movie, but I just realized that in the, I think, 10 years that we've had superhero movies, we've never really seen a coming-of-age superhero movie, and that's what Spider-Man Homecoming was for me. And, Peter Parker is my all-time favorite character for that very reason, because if you read those Spider-Man comics, it's like a coming-of-age story, and you see Peter Parker not only fighting supervillains, but going through like high school problems and money troubles and everything like that. And Spider-Man Homecoming, I think, was the first movie to reflect that side of him as like a really as a way to make the story go. Not only is he like going after the Vulture and stuff like that, he's also dealing with stuff in high school and crushes and dealing with his aunt and sneaking out at night. And for the first time, I saw my favorite character the exact way that I had pictured him for my whole childhood, and that was a really special experience for me.
Yeah, for me, I am, and I have always been partial to the Amazing Spider-Man series. But you make a really good point. One that I realized just now about Spider-Man Homecoming and the way it deals with kind of the love lives in his films. In Raimi's trilogy and the two web films, the romances, I don't know, it just doesn't feel as real as the romance in Spider-Man Homecoming, because Peter, I'm not as well versed in the comics, so forgive me if I kind of get this wrong, but he, from what I understand, he's supposed to be kind of this a little bit awkward kid, and he's staring dreamingly off at Liz almost the entire movie, and then through a series of events that happens in the movie, he finally gets his chance. But it also doesn't end up exactly well for him. But the way that Tom Holland portrayed it, and the way that he was written in the movie to kind of pine after this character rather than kind of just falling into it like in the previous two films, I really preferred that over what had been shown in the previous Spider-Man iterations.
Yeah, and they even make references to coming-of-age movies in there. You mentioned it earlier. There's a nice little Ferris Bueller reference in Spider-Man Homecoming.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another one to me where Ferris Bueller is such a fun, character-driven comedy, but it's still got that kind of coming-of-age heart that just... I think that's what makes it rewatchable for me, is that you can call this sentimental if you like, but I love feeling happy at the end of movies.
Yeah. If we're bringing up Ferris Bueller is one of my favorite movies of all time, and the reason is because of that trio, and because they are just so much fun. But at the end of the day, each of them isn't just a character that just spews out funny lines. They are legitimate characters, and you feel like they're human beings, and you feel that they each have their own aspirations and their own problems, and each of them gets their own time to shine and have a little heart throughout the movie, throughout all the hijinks that they go throughout that movie. But I do see the similarities. I can see them here. And Spider-Man Homecoming was purposely designed to be to reflect some John Hughes-esque moments throughout the film.
Yeah, and I know John Hughes is very much like an acquired taste for a lot of film fans, but if there's one thing I can't deny about his movies is that they're so rewatchable and they're so fun. And with coming of age, I think this is sort of like a PSA. Just because the character's younger than you, it doesn't mean that you can't relate to their struggles. I mean, I can still rewatch Harry Potter as a coming-of-age story because, he starts out his journey when he's 11 and he ends it when he's 17. But the thing that makes Harry Potter work for me as well is that besides the whole coming-of-age angle, it adds on all these fantasy elements that makes it really fun. So I think that's why more people like Harry Potter. If it was just a film series about Harry Potter and Hogwarts, it may not have as much appeal, but that's the beauty about coming of age, is that not only can you do great teen movies with it or teen stories, but you can mix it with different genres, and it always lends itself quite well.
And I think that's a great place to end this segment, because I don't think I could say it any better than you just did. So we're gonna take a really quick break, and we'll be right back to talk about kind of a coming of age TV show almost. And a guilty pleasure, well, at least of mine. I don't know if it's a guilty pleasure for Nolan, but one of my favorite TV shows right now, and that's Riverdale. We'll be right back. And we are back for the free chat segment where we are going to be talking about one of our favorite shows on television right now. May not be the best quality show, but we love it all the same, and that's Riverdale. CW has this way, I mean, Nolan mentioned Supernatural earlier. CW has this way of putting out these shows that people just seem to gravitate towards, and a lot of people know CW might not have the biggest budget you can see through, just the design of these films. We were just in the break talking about Stranger Things. If you look at the production design between those films, it's astronomically different. But CW has a way of making TV shows that really just appeal to everyone now. Nolan, what's so appealing about Riverdale?
Right, so I should not love Riverdale as much as I do. I mean, I didn't even read Archie comics as a kid, but when I saw that they were doing like a kind of murder mystery Twin Peaksy thing in high school, I was immediately sold on that. And I grew up watching The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, so I was a big fan of like Cole Sprouse, and like his character Jughead is just he reminds me a lot of have you read The Catcher in the Rye?
I have not, and I know it's a classic one that a lot of people are supposed to read, but I haven't.
His character is very reminiscent of like Holden Caulfield, who's kind of the king of angsty teen characters in literature, and to see that reflected in Riverdale is really fun. But you don't just have Jughead, you really gravitate towards the whole bunch of characters. Like, you like Betty, you like Veronica, you like Archie especially in the second season. I know a lot of problems I had with him in the first season is that he kind of faded into the background, but in this one, he's in full force being an active protagonist, and I love it. And Riverdale is something that I wish that I watched in high school, because seeing how so many people are gravitating towards it, not only is it giving more attention to the comic industry because of Archie, but it's opening the door to do these kind of stories, but do them in different ways. I mean, I know they're doing a Sabrina show now to spin off from Archie, and they want it to have kind of like a horror Carrie kind of influence, and we wouldn't have got that if Riverdale hadn't been so successful.
Yeah, I know a lot of fans of the Archie comic have really kind of been averse to this to this adaptation. One in particular, Manning, who's a friend, editor, and a former guest on this show. He is a fan of Archie, and he said that this show was just not for him. The minute he saw it, he's like, no, that's not mine, or that's not for me. But you're right about Jughead. I grew up with the Sweet Life shows, both of them, and when I saw that Cole Sprouse is in it, immediately I had to go and watch it. And he, to me, in the first season, was the best written character, and the most complex character, dealing with various issues about, I wouldn't say Riverdale is particularly deep, but it does try to tackle some of these messages, especially about, your place in society and where you're born, especially this season with the whole North versus South Side conflict with the crime, and Jughead is dealing with that. And then when you talk about Archie in the second season, we're only like 3 or 4 episodes in, but you can already see that they're starting to deal a little bit about how he deals with trauma and what he's gone through in the past year. So I think that's cool. Plus, all the characters are super hot.
Well, I can speak from my own experience with that, because when I was in high school, sadly, 3 students that I knew tragically passed away, and I walked into school the next day, and it was just like a complete kind of blur of sadness, and just like no one really knew what to say. And I think Riverdale reflects that very well in its first season.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's good that it knows how to tackle those issues well without it leering into like melodramatic sides for me.
Yeah, there's certain things that Riverdale does super well, and you're right about dealing with those super serious moments. They don't over dramatize them just kind of to get for that shock value for viewers. They take those seriously, and then there's the other side with the romance. They do CW it for lack of a better phrase. But that's something that really drew me to the show as well, because who doesn't need a little bit of drama in their life? Everybody says they don't like drama, but really we do, and Riverdale has tons of that.
If someone's a movie fan and they say they don't like drama, that immediately confuses me, because it's the reason you read fiction and the reason you watch shows is because, at least why I do it, is because they always relate to stuff that I've gone through in my own life, and seeing it done there, I mean, fiction has this like really powerful like ability where it can teach you how to deal with these things, but it can also remind you that, you know, if these kind of things happen to you, it doesn't always mean it's going to be the end of the world. You can escape into them and you can feel better because of it. And, you know, Riverdale hasn't quite hit in the stride where it hasn't had like that perfect moment yet for me that I always look for in TV shows, but, you know, I love the characters, I love the setting, I love the whole Twin Peaks style that it has, and I'm sure it's going to last for at least probably 8 seasons. We're probably going to see these characters grow into like the college years, and I'd be fine with it because I like them that much.
Yeah, and connecting it back to the cinema chat segment, they actually, one thing that really surprised me was in this, we're getting a little bit into spoilers here, but when Molly Ringwald showed up, this show actually has a pretty decent cast of people in it, especially bringing in one of the biggest coming of age stars of all time.
Oh yeah, and something that was really funny for me was the fact that Skeet Ulrich plays Jughead's dad, and there's one episode where he says, "Yeah, I'm not a killer." I'm like, dude, yeah, you said that in Scream, and look how that ended.
This show is chock full of references, and I don't know if you've seen the Death Note anime, but that's one that really stuck out to me. Is Jughead was sitting like the character L, who crouches in a really weird way and eats food a really weird way, and they're in Pop's booth, and he crouches and sits down and grabs a cherry off the top and eats it exactly like L, and I'm like, that's just a reference to Death Note, and they've done that so many times. They've made like Hamilton references, they made reference to all sorts of pop culture, which I think just makes the show a little bit more fun too.
Yeah, it does, and if they eventually have Jughead's mom, I really want them to get Neve Campbell just to complete the Scream trio.
Yeah. Who knows? She might appear in the spin-off series to add to that horror element. But that is all the time that we have today to talk about coming of age and Riverdale. I want to thank Nolan Dean for joining me on today's episode. Nolan, where can people find you?
You can find me at NolanDean27 or on YouTube. It's just my name, Nolan Dean. I make video essays about storytelling. I just released a new one for the Halloween season, one about Nosferatu. And my next one is going to be about Spider-Man Homecoming. I'm going to be doing it on how comics can come to life. Hopefully that'll be out sometime this month, but I can never give an exact date for these. And if you want to hear more about Moonflower, I'm always tweeting about it, so check me out over there.
Yeah, Nolan's Twitter is bumping. I really like it. And to answer your question from before, I have seen some of your video essays, and they are really good. And I love those type of movie/TV, entertainment industry video essays on YouTube. Those are some of my favorite YouTube channels. So definitely check out Nolan's channel. If you guys made it all the way to the end of this episode, thank you. And you guys know you can always check me out on Twitter at mchinquee96 or on the podcast Twitter CQ_chats. But until next week, I'll chat with you guys later.
That's Stifler's mom?
Yep.
Shit. Cannot believe a fine woman like this produced a guy like Stifler.
Dude!
That chick's a MILF.
What the hell is that?
MILF. Mom, I'd like to